Hey lovely reader friends, it's Alora. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of November. Now I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I used to do it, and I'm going to start with the two books that I read in November that I loved. The first of those, it was actually the last book that I finished in the month, was Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson. This is a novel in verse, and it explores the story of Geryon, who is this winged red monster in the story of Hercules. He's one of Hercules' 10 or 12, if you want to be technical, feats that he had to overcome. In the original myth, Hercules comes across the sea to the island where Geryon lives, and he kills Geryon, takes his cattle, kills his little dog, and this story is a reimagining of that, but more as an origin tale. It looks at Geryon's life as a child, as someone who is so different from everyone around him. He's red, he has wings, and then it also explores his potential relationship with Hercules prior to Hercules coming across and killing him. There's LGBTQ plus rep in this, and the writing is absolutely phenomenal. The main reason that I love this book, other than the fact that I adore Greek retellings, is Anne Carson's way of putting words together was so lyrical and so unexpected, and you would kind of trip over the sentences and realize how beautiful they were and how potent they were and how you never would have put those words together that way, but that it was actual perfection and it was describing something in the most accurate and beautiful way possible. So please read this book if you have any interest in Greek retellings or if you just love lyrical writing. If anybody's curious about my life, I am still working on my PhD. I only have 2 terms left, or 1.5 terms left. I'm very excited. The terms are quarters, so I'm getting very close, and then I'll be working on my dissertation. All very exciting, but it means that I'm just swamped with work because I'm also still working, like at a job. The second book that I fell in love with in the month of November was Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour. Now, first of all, look at the cover. It is splendid, and then if you open it, her eyes open, so it's like this little, it's kind of creepy. It starts out as this gorgeous cover, but then when you open it, you realize that something about it is a little bit unsettling. Now, this book has been put in different genres, and some people have classified it as horror. I would disagree. There are ghosts in this story, but it is not horrific. There's no gore. It's not off-putting. It's just got this haunting, gorgeous, eerie tone, and I loved it. The setting was perfect. It's set in Northern California on the coast, and so if you've been there, I've driven through there a lot of times, you know that it's just oftentimes so foggy and chilly and damp and gorgeous. This follows the story of Mila, who has been orphaned, and she's like 18 or 19 when this book starts, and basically she's leaving her most recent foster parents to go to this new job that she has as a teacher on a kind of commune. Essentially, it's this couple who adopts lots of children. They adopted, I don't know, more than 50 children over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. And Mila is going there to be a teacher to the kind of middle-aged children, the kind of middle schoolers. And when she arrives, there's only one there. And this is really a story about grief. It's a story about pain. It's a story about reconciling with one's past and one's ghosts, and there is this ghostly element that you're not sure if it's real or if it's supposed to be metaphorical, at least at first, you know, in the story when you start reading it. But the writing is impeccable. I wouldn't change anything about this book. It was so beautifully done. I did read We Are Okay by Nina LaCour this year, earlier in the summertime, and that was the first Nina LaCour book that I've ever read, but it was so great that I knew when this one came out, even though it was classified as horror and I'm like such a wimp, that I still really wanted to read it. So I'm really glad that I did, and I hope that I can convince you to pick it up. And now my camera has died, so we have shipped it over so that I can plug it in and have it reach the outlet. 2020, am I right? Actually, just bad planning. So now we're going to switch gears and move chronologically through the month. The first book that I completed in November was Bunny by Mona Awad. Now, I have seen a lot of people read this to greatly mixed reviews. This is definitely a horror book, and it has such a weird premise, and I don't know that I really want to spoil it for you, but the main character is a writer, and so this book really explores the concept of creating your own story. It is a bit like a cult book because our main character starts to become indoctrinated by this group of girls at her MFA program who all call each other Bunny. So they use it like a term of endearment, or like a hi honey or hi dear. It's like, hey Bunny. And she, in the past, our main character Samantha has absolutely abhorred these girls, and she's like, these are grown women, why are they acting like... Very close to the start of the book, she starts to be drawn into their group. I think that one of the main strengths of this book is the perspective that it takes. This is a bit of a difficult one to talk about just because there is a lot of room to spoil it, and going into it without knowing very much is probably for the best because it's just so shocking. If you've noticed, I haven't been giving these books ratings. That's because I've decided not to rate books anymore on a 5-star scale. I don't think it's a very productive or effective way of communicating the nuances of something. This could be an entire discussion about dichotomizing things and creating false categories and making things overly simplistic, but we don't need to go there right now. The second book that I finished in November was actually an audiobook called 10 Reasons for Deleting Your Social Media Right Now. I've been doing a lot of research on the detrimental effects of technology, particularly smartphones and social media, and so this book gave me a unique perspective. I would say it isn't my favorite book that I've read on this topic. I much preferred something like Digital Minimalism, but this did really present a unique perspective because the man who wrote this book has been involved in Silicon Valley for such a long time, and he really was a front runner in creating a lot of these technologies and pushing them to the public. It's just so fascinating to me to see the behaviorism at play, the principles that can be applied to the way in which social media in particular is impacting, affecting, and to a degree controlling our behavior. And so it really was, I wouldn't say eye-opening, but it was fascinating to see his perspective. I would say it wasn't as digestible, so this probably wouldn't be the first one that you'd want to pick up on the subject, but maybe a second or third kind of follow-up to gain more information and insight. After that, I read something a little bit lighter, a little bit more fun, and that was Saga Volume 5 by Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan. I have been trying to read one volume of this every month for the last few months, and I've really been enjoying the story. The artwork is absolutely phenomenal, so gorgeous. It is extremely graphic in a number of ways, so if you're sensitive to that, you might want to steer clear, but if you like multiple perspective fantasy, kind of sci-fi, adventure stories, this is for you. And also it has fantastic characterization and character growth throughout the story too. So I think a lot of people know what this is by this point, and I can't really spoil the story of the 5th volume, but the first volume, if you're unaware, mostly follows this family, this little family with the mom, the dad, and the newborn baby, and the parents are from opposing factions in this war, essentially, but they have come together because of their love, and they have this new baby, and they're being hunted by both sides, both of their governments. So it's focusing on how love can bridge this divide between these two people groups who really think that they're just bound to hate each other forever, but we're starting to see that that doesn't have to be the case. That there is room for empathy, and there is room for compassion, and there is room for understanding and really listening to other people's perspectives. So I think that the message of this is not only really fantastic, but also very pertinent right now. After that, I finally finished listening to Kafka on the Shore by Murakami. I've been listening to this audiobook for like 5 months, and maybe 4 months. It's been a long time, and it wasn't because it was bad. This is obviously a surrealist book, and it's one of his most popular and famous. I enjoyed it, and I always felt really comforted when I was listening to it, and part of that might be because I've listened to so many Murakami books on audiobook, so the narrator's voice is very familiar to me and comforting, but also this book was just so damn weird that sometimes I was a little bit off-put, and it wasn't the most compelling of his books for me. I didn't feel the need to pick it up. Like, I always enjoyed it when I was listening to it, but I wasn't just sitting around thinking, oh, I really want to keep reading Kafka on the Shore. Anyway, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to be said about that book, but that it would really need to be a spoiler discussion. The basic premise follows 2 different individuals. One is a young boy who has run away from home to this small town kind of far away from the city where he grew up. and he's 15, so he's way too young to be leaving home by himself legally. And then another perspective is this kind of middle-aged man who describes himself as not too bright. He has been mentally disabled in some way, and that's part of the mystery. Though I can't personally speak to the disability representation, I think that it was handled very tactfully. But the rest of the book was just really bizarre, and I think that perhaps one thing that I could say about it that wouldn't be a spoiler is that it deals with the concept of an Oedipal complex. Anyway, it would not be the first Murakami book that I would start with or recommend beginning with, because it was just real out there. And there was definitely payoff at the end, but maybe less so than some of his other works. After that, I listened to the audiobook for King and the Dragonflies by Kaysen Callender. This book has been recommended a lot in BookTube this year. I've seen a lot of people reading it and recommending it. It really was well done. It's a middle grade novel about King, whose older brother has recently died, and it explores King's grief, and it also explores this kind of internal battle that he's having with himself because of his sexual identity and what his brother may or may not have thought about his sexual identity. It also explores the family relationships and how they're impacted by grief. I think that was one of its strong points. And it explores this really budding, adorable, sweet, warm-hearted relationship between these two young boys, just getting to know themselves and getting to know each other and figuring out where they fit in the world and where they fit in each other's lives. So I really do think it was well done. It was sweet, it was timely, it was really just heartwarming, and I would recommend that one. The audiobook was pretty nice too. So if you like listening to things, that might be a good choice for you. After that, I read Watch Over Me, which I already talked about and was fantastic. I wanted to add one more thing about Watch Over Me. I didn't mention very much about the relationships between the people in the book because I don't want to give anything away, but I did want to just point out that also, in addition to the characterization and the lyrical writing, the relationships were so heartbreakingly gorgeous. Okay, moving on. After that, I read a poetry collection called Violet Bent Backward Over the Grass. This is by Lana Del Rey, who many people may recognize as a musician. It had poetry and also some pictures, both that she had taken and some that she had found. There's also some artwork in here by another gal, and I quite liked it. It dealt a lot with LA and her love for LA. It dealt with relationships and how she felt about herself. I think that the title poem, the titular poem, is my favorite, Violet Bent Backward Over the Grass. It's very short, so there's not too much to say about this other than it was nice and I enjoyed it. It wasn't something that I'll think about for years to come, but I am happy that I read it. After that, I finished reading Taproot by Keezy Young. This is a graphic novel about a gardener and a ghost. It was sweet. It was kind of the sweet that I didn't feel too connected about. Like, afterward I felt like that was really nice, but I didn't feel like, again, that I would remember it or that I would keep thinking about the characters really afterwards. But I did like the illustration. There was kind of this this interplay between these dark pages where our ghost is having kind of being placed into another dimension really briefly, and then also these like happy pages in the garden store where our main character works. And so I'm just showing pictures from the very front of the book, so it's not a spoiler. But it was sweet. There was LGBTQ plus rep in this also. It was a nice love story with nice illustrations, and that's about all that I felt about it. Other than the Autobiography of Red, which I already mentioned was the last book that I read in the month, the second to last book, the penultimate book, was Homebody by Rupi Kaur. Now, I've read all three of Rupi Kaur's poetry collections at this point, and when I read Milk and Honey, I adored it. I absolutely fell in love with her writing and with the emotional connection she was able to make with the reader, and the order in which she placed her poems and the illustrations that she drew to go along with them that really helped cement those feelings, those emotions that she pulled out of you. The Sun and Her Flowers, her second one, I didn't like. I felt like maybe she had less inspiration for that one, like maybe the publishers were pushing her to release another title, and so it felt a little bit less cohesive and less like she had taken her time to really mull over the words. This one I was really anticipating. It came out mid-November. I've had it pre-ordered for months. One of the main topics in this book in particular is depression. She talked about her experience both in leading up to the publication of the book and within the poetry collection itself. dealing with depression, and I really respect the openness and the vulnerability that Ruby Kaur displays in her poetry. She really does talk about a lot of topics that are very taboo, and she talks very frankly about women's bodies and empowerment. She talks about sexual harassment and sexual violence, and she talks about depression, and so, but she also talks about kind of this feeling of being buffered up by the other women in her life, and rising up above these horrific things that have happened to her, or these negative feeling states that she has been in, or the mental health challenges that she has faced. And so I really did like that aspect of it. I connected a lot with some of the topics, and I really respect her and I appreciate her being willing to put herself out here like this, because I think it would be so challenging to really just like strip down so much and share your story, and I think that a lot of people will find solace in a collection like this. I do want to say that it wasn't my favorite. Again, I didn't feel the same level of, I don't know if it's excellence, because I felt like Milk and Honey had this arete, you know, the Greek concept of excellence, where something is just good, you know, not good in a like mediocre way, but good. I didn't feel that way about this book, and I don't know if it just came at the wrong time for me, or if, I don't know. It could be a lot of different things, but I think that this book will connect with a lot of readers, and I hope that the people out there who need it are able to find it. Alrighty friends, if you've stuck with me this long, thank you so much. I really have missed you, and I'm hoping to see you a lot more soon, and definitely in the new year. So keep strong, and I'm sending you lots of love.